Hello! Welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male today, while keeping God at the center, striving and fighting against darkness and evil, standing out, shining as a light in the world. In this crazy world with everything going on, with culture and society, and many other men tossed to and fro like waves, we stand firm on rocks like a lighthouse shining in the darkness. Strong, perseverant alpha males. Before we get into the bio and the topic, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you think these podcasts are worth supporting, if you think this men's ministry, this outreach to make men stronger, better men, is worth something, I pray that you would go to goodshepherdtraining.com and Patreon and click on there. Or just reach out to me. Again, you can do that at goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, we'll plug in the bio and get into the day's topic. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life in everything that I do, and this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God. called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Now, you might have been curious by the quizzical nature of today's topic, but that was for a reason. I wanted people to listen to figure out what today's topic was going to be about. Today's topic is going to be a mixed bag, a cornucopia, a menagerie, a mosaic of different topics. Things that I often get asked, or things that I just wanted to talk about that don't take up an entire episode. And not maybe asked verbatim, but maybe it's a common theme that I get asked. So I thought for your benefit, I would combine those. Instead of never getting to hear them, I would combine one episode of several different topics. So it's going to be a wide-ranging array of different topics that we're going to talk about today. Going to cast a wide net. If you listened to my bio, the intros before, or know me at all, you'll know where I'm probably going to start if I put it in order of importance, or one thing more important than the others. So for those of you just getting into the Bible, just coming to or coming back to God, or wanting to understand it better, if you've ever read the Bible from front to back, or ever attempted it even, you'll know what a daunting task that can be, and some of the middle parts won't make a lot of sense. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, but perhaps if this is your first go at it, that's not the best way. And perhaps my way that I'm going to suggest is not the best way, but it's the best way that I know for right now that I can think of. So if you're going to start reading the Bible, getting to know the greatest story ever told and the greatest love story ever told between God and man, I would suggest you start, no surprise, in the beginning. Start in Genesis, and then probably read the first several chapters. It's good to get the foundation, get to know that. Read the first several chapters of Genesis. I would say right up until Noah and the flood. And then from there, you may want to read the story of Exodus, especially up until, let's say, chapters 20 is where the Ten Commandments are given, probably up until chapters 23 or 24 in Exodus. Now, Deuteronomy is one of my favorite books. You may want to skip that until you get some more context. After you've read the Genesis and Exodus, I would suggest going to read one of the Gospels. Reading the Gospel of John is just beautiful, and it would be hard to beat. Instead of just reading all of them in a row, I would say pick John. If you want something shorter, then pick Mark, but John's going to be my number one recommendation. So I would say read John. After you've read John, read the book of Romans. The book of Romans is beautiful. And then after you've read those, you'll probably have a much better understanding. And then if you're still hungry for more, I'm sure you can do your own research and, maybe go back and start reading, Deuteronomy and, reading the book of Isaiah that prophesies about the birth of Jesus, and then reading the other Gospels. And if you're ever on a day where you're just not into sitting down for a long read or don't feel like knocking out several chapters at once, I always recommend, if you have a short amount of time, or sometimes you just don't feel like, I don't just read the Bible when I feel like it. I don't just work out when I feel like it. I do those things because they're the right thing to do. Anyway, if you're ever in a day where you just don't feel it, you're just not about it, and you got to force yourself to do it, at least start in Proverbs or start in Psalms. The Psalms are beautiful, the Proverbs are beautiful, and they're usually short, with the exception of like Psalms 119. They're usually very short. So that's a good place to if you just want to read for a few minutes and get some time with God and prayer and reading your Bible, those are a good place. And again, there may be better ways, but if I'm giving you a suggestion on where to start, that would be it. All right, next. Been a lot of talk about dry fire recently in the Inner Circle. If you guys don't know, the Inner Circle is made up of patrons. If you want to support on Patreon, you can. And we get together and chat in there quite a bit. And recently, dry fire has been brought up. And that begs the question, what is my dry fire routine? Well, I would say just like my live fire routine, it should start with the fundamentals. You should start by seeking to master the fundamentals. And a lot of people hear the term dry fire, which is basically your go-to handgun, rifle, defensive gun, whatever, practicing everything without ammunition, without firing a live round as dry fire. Where to start on that and what should be the bulk of your practice, I believe, is practicing the perfect shot. That crow apparently does not like the podcast. I think it's a blue jay. He doesn't like me here. Anyway, where do we start and where do we go with dry fire? Get your good, solid, perfect stance, as perfect as you can humanly get it. Focus on the fundamentals. Your stance, your grip, your sight alignment, your sight picture, your trigger control, your follow through, all that. And give a hard focus on the front sight and or a hard focus on your reticle and your optic, whether it's rifle or pistol or whatever. The same things apply. And you should focus on all those. And when that shot breaks, you should just hear a click and nothing else should happen as far as you can humanly perceive it. That reticle, that front sight in relation to the rear sight in relation to the target should remain perfectly still and you should just hear a click. Now, this is quite the task. That sounds simple to explain, and indeed it is simple. And like I teach often when I teach firearms classes, teaching somebody to shoot and explain it to them, I can do in a few minutes. It takes a lifetime to master. Getting that front sight to not move, getting that reticle to not move, that takes a massive amount of skill and dedication and discipline. You heard my bio. I'm a state rifle and pistol champion. I've won more shooting competitions than I can remember. And most of the time, even now when I dry fire, I don't get that. I see something move. And then what comes into play there is your self-diagnostic ability. And the further you get along in your shooting journey, the better you'll be at this. You'll say, oh, my front sight lifted up because I had too much torque on my wrist. Or my front sight went down and to the left because I flinched. That's a pretty common one, especially for new shooters. Or I don't have good left to right tension. I don't have equal tension with my right and left hand, whether a long gun or a handgun. So it moved. Anyway, that'd be the bulk of where I would start in a dry fire session. It sounds super boring, but it takes a lot of discipline and dedication and mastery. And when you finally get it and you can't perceive in your human, of course, everything moves, your heart beats, you breathe, things like that. But as far as you can perceive it, nothing moves. You just hear a click and everything else seems to be perfect. That's worth striving for. Then after that, you can work on things like going from the draw to getting into that good solid position. And maybe stepping to the left draw, stepping to the right draw. Whether it's a rifle, going from the sling position to a shooting position quickly. Things like that can be added on later, but that should be the bulk and where to start. All right, shifting gears dramatically again, let's talk about water filters. Another thing that came from our Patreon chat. People asking about water filters. Where I'm not the expert on water filters, I'm not a microbiologist or a virologist or anything like that. But I'll tell you what I know in my experience in water filters. First, I'll talk about portables and then household. I started out using Life Straws, as many probably do, for the man portable, and I use these quite a bit. This is not just academic. I routinely go out into the wilderness, out into the forest, and drink the water that I find. And I started out with a Life Straw, and a Life Straw works for a little while. But I have found that they tend to clog up very easily with dirty water. Dirty, I mean with a lot of particulates, muddy water, silty water, things like that. So I switched from that to the Mini Sawyer. They're about the same price, and I find the Mini Sawyer much better, and it's about half the size and the same price. And it doesn't seem to have that problem of getting clogged up. I have used the same Sawyer Mini on many outings for months and months, and I don't clean it out nearly as good as you're supposed to. And I find them to last much longer, and I've never gotten dysentery from either one. So my recommendation on those is the Mini Sawyer. Nothing wrong with a life straw if that's what you can find. Just know that in my experience, drinking dirty water, they get clogged up quickly. And they don't tend to get clogged up little by little. They tend to get clogged up, like, let's say I use it one time and I go out the next time and I have it and I go to drink from it. It's almost impossible to get an amount of drinkable water through it without feeling like your eyeballs are going to suck into your head. The Mini Sawyer, again, seems to be much better as far as longevity goes, and it's smaller. So that's my recommendation. As for a family one, I tend to go cheap on stuff. And years ago, I said, clean water is important, especially as a prepper. How much do I spend on any given gun that I'm going to buy and research? I don't go for the cheapest, crappiest one I can find. I go for a good one. And I did that with a water filter in the Berkey. The regular, normal-sized Berkey, I think it's around a gallon, maybe a little bit more. And the filters on that, I got the regular, the most expensive black filters, whatever they're called. And I got the fluoride filters for the bottom. So 4 filters in all. And that thing is awesome. Worth every penny. I've had it for years and years. It still works amazing. It would look good in a condo. It would look good in the middle of nowhere in a camp. It would easily get enough water for a family. Now, it does take a while, so if you plan to dump a gallon in and drink a gallon in about 5 minutes, it doesn't work like that. It has very good filters. It doesn't require any power or any pumping or anything. It literally just uses gravity, but that means it could take several hours for the water to come out. So a best practice for that is just fill it up at night or fill it up before you go to work in the morning or whatever, and then when you come back, it's full. But I have found the Berkey to be very, very good. My other suggestion to the patrons was, you can just buy the filters and make your own with just food-grade plastic bucket. You could do that. I would just say, if you can afford it, get the Berkey. I can't speak for any other ones being bad, but I can speak for the Berkey water filtration system being very good. And one thing I mentioned to them, and I'll mention to you because I think it's worth mentioning, doesn't really apply so much right now, but in like a grid-down scenario where it's, every man for himself. As I mentioned in the bio, I have been a professional big game hunter and guide. One of the best ways to ambush animals if you're a predator is near a water hole. So if your filtration system takes a long time, let's say a Sawyer Mini or a Life Straw or something like that, there's nothing wrong with those, but you have to be there at the water hole sucking water out or find some kind of container. For scenarios like that, I would really recommend, and even in good times, recommend carrying some iodine tablets. You can just grab whatever water is there, throw some iodine in it, and drink it wherever you are. So in a really bad scenario, try not to spend time near watering holes. Again, that's where predators ambush prey, near watering holes, especially in an environment where there's not a lot of good water. You know where things are going to go because they have to have water. You'll see that in the, African bush, and you'll likely see that in a really, really bad scenario, grid down type scenario, where the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan. So keep that in mind. All right, let's shift gears again and talk about something different. Let's talk about firearms. Let's talk about one of the most commonly asked scenarios to people behind the gun counter at most places. I've certainly heard it a lot. Somebody comes in, they want a handgun. They say, I just want a gun. What handgun should I buy? And what I start out with is, do you own any guns? And are you going to carry it on you? If the answer to those is no, then I say, then you probably don't want a handgun. If you don't own any firearms and you don't plan to carry it on your person all the time, then you don't want a handgun. I love handguns. I've won the vast majority of my competitions, medals, things like that in handgun. Well, I guess that's not true. I've won quite a bit in rifle too, but handgun is what I spend most of my practice time on and most of my dedication to. But I do that because it is the hardest to master. And by God's grace, I try and be armed pretty much all the time when I'm outside the house. And it's not really practical for me to carry around a shotgun most of the time or a rifle. So I carry a handgun, so I practice a lot with a handgun. Also, I found in my experience that if you're good with a handgun, you'll be good with a rifle and a shotgun. You can be great with a rifle and suck at a handgun. So all that aside, I talk to all that to say this. If you don't own any guns, you probably don't want a handgun. They're the least effective in general on stopping threats, whether that's a bear, whether that's a person, a burglar, somebody trying to take advantage of a woman, whatever that might be. I try and keep this show friendly. I know kids listen, and I'm very thankful for that. But in any of those scenarios, the handgun is the least effective. They're also the hardest to hit targets with. You could give me good students, and I could make them pretty proficient in a handgun in a week. You could give me somebody that's never fired a gun, and I could teach them to be more proficient with a shotgun in about 15 minutes. They are much better at stopping threats. You do have to aim a shotgun. That's a myth that you can just aim in the general direction. They don't work like that. You do have to aim them. But aiming at home defense distances, or most common defensive distances, with a long-barreled shotgun in the shoulder, looking down a barrel is much, much easier than firing a handgun. And again, I love handguns. I just don't think it's the right choice. So when they say, what handgun should I get? I often start with, you probably don't want a handgun. And if you're not going to carry it on you, the reason that you have a handgun is because you can have it on you. If you live in a state or you don't have a concealed carry permit, or you're not going to carry it on you, then what are you doing with the handgun? Now, I could be wrong. You may just want a handgun because that's the only thing you care about, and you just want to become like John Wick with a handgun, and it's coincidentally and maybe used for defense, and that's fine. Or maybe you've just decided that, you know what, big guns are scary and intimidating, and you just want a handgun. And I get that all the time, and I'm a man, so I try and, by God's grace, an alpha male beats his emotions into submission. He doesn't give in to his emotions. But I understand that women are not always like that. So a woman that may be averse to a big gun, even though it's easier to shoot and more effective, may not be as adverse to a handgun. And I've seen that enough to know that that is true. So I'd much rather a woman have something than nothing, even if it's harder to shoot and less effective. In that case, I would say don't go for the little itty-bitty small handguns. Those are meant to be carried. In general, for the same cartridge, a larger handgun is easier to shoot. So go for a full-size handgun. One that I find the most ergonomic would be the Smith & Wesson M&P. If you're looking for like a first one, the Smith & Wesson M&P I find to be very ergonomic. I find them to be much more ergonomic than Glocks for most people. If you want a Glock, there's nothing wrong with that. Also, right now on the market, if you're looking to get your first handgun, you already have a shotgun, a rifle, all that stuff, you're looking to get into handguns, I think Berettas right now are really underappreciated. They're kind of the old kid on the block. They're not really seen as a new cool kid, but they are just phenomenally accurate, reliable, awesome guns. Great combat handguns. And again, if you're not going to carry it on you, and they're not too big to carry. I've carried one before as a CCW. Most people wouldn't, but they're a fantastic gun. And right now, they're not crazily coveted. So I would suggest that. Next, we're going to shift gears and talk about water again. And I think water is extremely important. And one of the really under-talked about things in the being prepared, being able to provide and protect category. You probably can't shoot your way to water. You need to get clean water. And one thing that comes up, we talked about water filtration and things like that, but how do you get said water? Just realize that if you live in the suburbs, what I would call people hives, if you live in places like that, if you live in anywhere on city water, that is reliant almost always on power, on grid power. And a lot of major disasters, whether they're natural or man-made, power is going to go out. You're used to just turning on the tap and water coming out. But what happens the day when you turn that faucet on and nothing comes out? Or even worse, water comes out and it looks clean, but you don't know, but the water treatment plant stopped working days ago, and you're going to have some real trouble by drinking that water and you don't even know it. Dirty water is a major killer in a lot of disasters in a lot of countries around the world even today. So how do you get clean water in a grid down scenario? I'd say the number one easiest way is to already have it. Storing water is cheap and easy. Most places, if you get a water bill, it's like fractions of a cent a gallon. So
I don't recommend storing water in like the gallon water jugs that you get at the store because they're not very robust. Generally, containers that are made for things that I don't generally drink, like soda and acidic drinks and things like that, those tend to be much more robust. Think about how much thicker a 2-liter bottle is than, your average gallon of water you buy at the store. They're much more robust. So rinse those out, clean those out, and fill those with clean water and have those. The easiest way to get clean water is to have clean water. Now, there's other things you can do. If you live on a well, I would encourage you to have a hand pump or some way. If you don't know, it takes quite a bit of power to draw water out of a well, especially a deep well. So even if you're on a well, if you don't have power, you might not be able to get it. And even if you have a generator, that generator may or may not be good enough to pump water. That is quite labor intensive. It's kind of like running an AC unit. It takes quite a bit of power to do that. So don't just assume that you're going to be able to get clean water. Know that you're going to be able to get clean water. Clean water is important. And again, going back to that Berkey, even if you can get water, if you don't know if it's clean or not, and even day to day, if you run it through the Berkey, that's the main reason I got it. I use it day to day. I drink out of it almost every day. Is that whether the water's clean or not, when you put it through the Berkey, it's almost certainly going to be better. It's going to remove, things like lead and fluoride and things you probably don't want to be drinking anyway. All right, shifting gears again. Going to answer another gun question. What should my first elk rifle be? And I got asked this by a young man when I was speaking at a young man's Christian organization. But I'm going to answer it more broadly as for a young man and as for an adult male that wants to get into elk hunting. So your first elk rifle, the number one recommendation I would say is stay away from magnums. You don't need a magnum to kill an elk. Plenty of elk have been killed with a 30-30. That's not my number one recommendation, but my number one thing for being a good hunter and putting down an elk is shot placement and discipline. And you get that by practicing. Number one, dry firing like we talked about. Number two, actually going out to a range, not shooting 1 or 2 rounds to zero it, but once you get that rifle zero, shooting from the kneeling, shooting from the prone, shooting off a log, shooting off your pack. And you're not going to want to do that. I don't care what man you are with a 300 Winchester Magnum. And I don't care how big and burly an alpha male you are and how good you control recoil. If you control recoil well, if you reduce it, you control it better. And that's just a fact that you can't get around. For that reason, I would say I do not recommend magnums, especially not for elk. Maybe for hippopotamus or, hunting lions in Africa, that's fine. But I don't need magnums. And I'd say you're almost certainly better off with more practice and better shot placement and more affordable ammo. So for that reason, I would stay away from magnums for a first elk rifle. And I guess if I had to pick one, quintessential, it'd be the 270. The 270 has killed many an elk. It is a good cartridge. It is easily available. If Walmart still sells ammo, I don't even know with all the political stuff going on right now, which I don't want to get into. But if they do, you can probably find 270 at Walmart or any big box store, a Big 5, an Academy, Gander Mountain, Bass Pro Shop, whatever. If they have rifle ammo, even in ammo apocalypse times, they're probably going to have 270. 270 is good. 30-06 is also very good, but if you're asking me to pick one, I think 270 is fine. It's going to do, in my opinion, just as well, and it's going to be less recoil and almost as available as 30-06. Some other good recommendations I would have, and this is getting to more of the younger shooter, the 7mm .8 is great. A little bit harder to find, but not rare. The 7mm .8 is great. Plenty of elk have been killed with it, and it's kind of ballistic twin that's a little bit older, the 7x57 Mauser. But a great cartridge, especially for a younger shooter. My go-to elk rifle that I've killed almost all my elk with is a 243. I don't recommend that. Again, I don't recommend that for a good first elk rifle. For a good deer rifle, whether man or younger man, I think it's probably a number one choice. But for elk, I'd say no. But I'd say that I know that I have the discipline to wait for a good shot and not just take a shot. If I was going on a dream hunt out west and I didn't live in a place covered with elk all the time, and that was my one shot, I might have to take, a running away shot or something like that. And I won't do that with a 243. I'll wait for a good shot where I can, I've killed enough animals where I know the anatomy. I know if I can weave it in between the last rib and into the chest cavity on a quartering away shot, or I know to avoid the front shoulder with a 243, or I would take that shot with a 30-06. I know those things. I wouldn't recommend it for a good first elk rifle. I think it's a little small, even though I've taken, I think, all my elk with a 243. But I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner. Again, I'd recommend a 270, and I'd recommend, if you want to go a little bit lighter for a younger shooter, the 7mm Odd 8. They're very efficient, very good cartridges. I don't even own them. I don't even own a 270, but I would still recommend it for a good first elk rifle. If you are on a budget, the Savage Axis is phenomenal. Everyone I've ever owned has been ridiculously accurate, and they're good. I always recommend stainless steel. They're only a few more dollars. So even if you're going to be in a dry place, if I have the option for stainless, I almost always go stainless. And the Savage Axis is available in stainless. If you want something like heirloom quality to pass down that's a really good rifle, I can really only recommend... Well, there's lots of good rifles, but I would recommend the Kimber Rifles. And I do that because that's what I have. That's what I shoot. That's what I hunt with. And that's what I use as a professional hunter and guide. So the Kimber Rifles, they're based on the old pre-1964 Winchester, the rifleman's rifle. They're based on that, and they're even a little bit smaller and scaled down because metallurgy has gotten better. And they're plenty strong, and they're handy. They're good rifles. So if you want like a premier rifle, I'd recommend that, and any of the ones that they make. They make the more classic-looking ones, and again, I prefer the stainless. With that, man, I think we're going to wrap up this mixed bag episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. If you like today's episode, you'd almost certainly like Patreon. We talk about stuff like this all the time, especially if you want to be part of our insider chat, which is patrons and an inside Facebook Messenger group where we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. In fact, a big chunk of the content today was from that group. Again, if you want to be a patron, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com. Also, I'll just put a link right down in the show notes to make it super simple for you. It'll be like checking out on Amazon. Just click, and there you go. With that, man, something a little different. I usually give a tactical tip. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. It's also a tactical tip if you're not familiar with the card game Conflicted. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic scenario game. You sit around with your buddies and do that. And again, we have that virtual tribe on Patreon, and we often play that on there. And sometimes we make up our own scenarios. So I'm going to give you a brain exercise for you to think about. Picture in a world where the peanut butter and chocolate is at the fan, whatever that means for you and your thought process. Things are really, really bad. You can get either a brand new Tesla and an AR-15 of your choosing, any one you want. Or you could have a Beretta 92 and a Hummer. Or you could have a longbow, 6 arrows, and a good, well-trained Arabian horse. Assume the guns have 3 loaded mags of ammo and a full charge, a full tank, and a good, healthy horse. Which one of those would you take? Just a fun thought experiment to think about. Which is going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. I mentioned before one of my favorite books is Deuteronomy. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 20. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So it shall be when you are on the verge of battle, that the priest shall approach and speak to the people, and say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. Do not be afraid. Do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Now that tactical verse was so good, it makes me think of another. Leviticus. You'll find this in chapter 26. You will chase your enemies and they shall fall by the sword before you. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. Your enemies shall fall by the sword before you, and I will look on you favorably. Thanks, men. Get out there. Have a blessed day.